Today's episode is brought to you by AMP Robotics. Did you know that AMP Robotics is transforming the economics of recycling using advanced artificial intelligence guided robots? Yep, the company's high-speed industrial robotics system, AMP Cortex, precisely automates the identification, sorting, and processing of material streams to extract maximum value for businesses that recycle municipal solid waste, e-waste, and construction and demolition materials. And the AMP Neuron AI platform operates AMP Cortex using advanced computer vision and machine learning to continuously train itself by processing millions of material images and adapting to changes in a facility's material stream. Plus, the AMP Insights web-based data management system captures all of this material stream data, providing insights and important alerts to operators so they can optimize their recycling business even more. And I've actually seen the system in action myself, and it's awesome to say the least. So go ahead and learn more at amprobotics.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Since it's Thanksgiving week, we are bringing you something food related. Well, something food related for your brain to nosh on anyway. So go ahead and listen. This is a session from Waste Expo from the Food Recovery Forum, and it is industry pioneers discussing solutions to food waste. So go ahead and enjoy, and happy Thanksgiving from your friends at Waste 360.
Welcome to the Nothing Wasted session, where industry visionaries will discuss solutions to food waste and wasted food. Our first speaker is Darby Hoover, Senior Resource Specialist with the Natural Resource Defense Council, who will present Waste Not, the Problem of Prevention.
Words matter. How we talk about things reflects how we think about things, but it also informs how we think about things. And how we think and talk about things influences how we act. The first time I came across this book, I was blown away. So Lakoff and Johnson's thesis in this book, Metaphors We Live By, is that words, specifically metaphors, are not just about language, but actually inform our conceptual system, how we think and act. So to give an example, in our culture, we have a conceptual metaphor that argument is war. So we use phrases like this to talk about and conduct argument, attacking weak points, criticisms on target, shooting down arguments. This is how we think about argument and how we act on argument. But what if, as Lakoff and Johnson propose, we instead try to imagine a culture where arguments are not viewed in terms of war, but where no one wins and loses, where there's no sense of attacking or defending, gaining or losing ground. Imagine a culture where an argument is viewed as a dance. The participants are seen as performers, and the goal is to perform in a balanced and aesthetically pleasing way. In such a culture, people would view arguments differently, experience them differently, carry them out differently, and talk about them differently. So how does this relate to waste? I think that waste itself is an idea, a concept that leads to a series of behaviors. There's no waste in nature. When something dies in a natural environment, it becomes food for something else. And that phenomenon was actually operative for most of human history, too. So for most of human history, our leavings were biological in origin, so they could be absorbed back into natural processes. But now, though, the sheer quantity and complexity of our discards means that we can't just throw things onto the ground or into the ocean and expect them to magically disappear. We can't really throw things away, which is one of our most popular metaphors about waste, throwing things away. There is no away. When I was in college, I worked at the campus recycling center. One day I'm out on my rounds and I'm heading towards the recycling bin to go pick it up. I see this guy walking along with a coffee cup, which at the time was polystyrene foam, because that was a long time ago. So this guy is so focused on his coffee cup, it is the elixir of life to him. It is the entire reason for him to exist. The coffee in that cup is everything. And then he finishes the coffee. I see his head come up, and I see his hands start to go out, and I see the exact moment where away enters this guy's mind. We're both heading towards the same recycling bin, and I'm thinking, oh, don't put that in that recycling bin, which is so clearly marked paper only, because back in those days we separated those things. Of course he put it in the recycling bin. He had already completely disconnected from it. He never thought about it again. He threw it away. So waste is an idea created by humans, and I think if we created that idea, we can uncreate it. How we talk about things dictates our attitudes and behavior and strategies and solutions. We know that putting things we don't want in a hole in the ground is not really a way. So we created this concept of diversion, this idea that we can just not put things in disposal. And that's an alternative that's good. But then we didn't really define what diversion meant. You've got disposal and you've got not disposal, and diversion is not disposal. So essentially, we created a good away. We said there's a bad away, that's this bin, but there's a good away, which is a very similar bin, but it's the good one. And we decided, because this was our concept of it, to maximize participation, to get as many people to participate, to make it as easy as possible, to take as many materials as possible and throw them all into one bin, so that, again, people don't really have to think about it. We created a good away. So the reality is, of course, that municipal solid waste is not homogeneous. It's made up of all different kinds of materials, each of which has an optimal destination or optimal processing pathway. So we created a system that does not acknowledge that doesn't say where are these materials going and how do we need to collect them and how do we need to talk about them in order to create something that actually abolishes the idea of a way. It doesn't just create a good away. So I'm really excited to be working on food waste after working on waste issues for decades. I like working on food waste because we actually talk about strategies that get at this no away, that actually get to this idea that we can talk about not producing waste in the first place, or not even coming up with the idea of waste in the first place. That we can use solutions that are about doing something other than managing the materials. But there's still a challenge with how we are talking about food waste and how we're dealing with our strategies around this that we need to really start thinking more about in order to get us where we want to go and avoid making some of the mistakes we've made with recycling. So part of the problem is we haven't really figured out how we do talk about food waste strategies. We use words in a way that are confusing and contradictory and not necessarily clear about what we mean or what we're hoping will happen. So is it food waste, which I think puts the emphasis on the waste, or is it wasted food, which puts the emphasis on the food and the inefficiencies in the food system that create waste? What the heck does the word recovery mean? A lot of people use it to mean food rescue, but other people use it to mean recycling. And there's the food recovery hierarchy, which says even not producing waste is recovery. Same with diversion. We use words in a confusing way, and it doesn't illuminate what we're actually trying to do. And let's not even get into the word edible, which I know those of you in California are really concerned about what that means. Believe me, at NRDC, we've had a lot of detailed conversations with CalRecycle about what we think it ought to mean and what it does mean. Edible is not the same as rescuable. Rescuable food sometimes contains inedible parts. Not all edible food is rescuable. We're using words in ways that confuse what our strategies actually are and what we want them to be. Now, there are some helpful steps to try to remedy this. I would say the food loss and waste protocol and standard is one very valiant attempt to start harmonizing our language and the ways we talk about things to get us towards a goal together. So the food loss and waste standard helpfully provides definitions for the various parts of food that are intended to help us harmonize the way we talk about it and the way that we and conduct strategies. So per the standard, the two material types that may be included in a food loss and waste inventory are food and or the associated inedible parts of food. That's elegant, it's beautiful, I love that. But the standard is very clear to note that it does not establish a universal definition for food loss and waste, because different organizations will have different reasons for quantifying lost or wasted food. These different goals lead to, or government regulations may even explicitly state, different definitions of what constitutes lost or wasted food. That's important, because what that says is we need to think about what we are trying to do instead, what our goals are for this. And in order to come up with a definition, which is not going to be the same for every application, we need to be very clear about how we are talking and thinking about this. Even food, how is that defined? It's defined differently in different cultures. We really need to start being clear and talking about what we're doing and also what we want to do. So given that all this is so confusing and contradictory and we're using so many different terms and types of ways to talk about this, along with our history in the US with recycling in particular, where we created a good away and people think that's all they need to think about, it is not very surprising that the distinction between different strategies does not always register with people. So for example, in one NRDC study, we found that 58% of our survey respondents feel less guilty about wasting food if it's composted. We have not done a good job of educating about the hierarchy and the fact that there are different resource implications for strategies at all the levels of the hierarchy. The higher you go up the hierarchy, the fewer resources you consume in terms of natural resources, but also financial resources and social resources. We have to get better about talking about that. So this, to me, creates the problem where, how do we talk about preventing this when we don't even know what we're talking about? We don't know what we're preventing. Are we preventing landfill disposal? Are we preventing waste generation? Are we preventing complex materials in our waste stream or things in the wrong bin? Are we preventing the mindset of waste, overconsumption, all of the above? So we already talked about diversion, which is not disposal, but what actually does happen or should happen to materials that are not disposed, that are diverted? The ways we talk about all this should point to what we want to happen, not just what we don't want to happen. So what do we want to do instead of wasting food? Conserve food. That's one idea. Love food because it's too good to waste. That's awesome. Eat food. Thank you, Michael Pollan. Embrace food. Aww. Save the food. Plug for NRDC's consumer campaign. And after we do all those things that we do want to do with food, we need to recycle the food scraps that are left over. Not just because we want to keep them out of the landfill, but because we need to rebuild soil. And that's a piece that we don't always remember to talk about. With recycling, traditional materials recycling, the greatest benefits, resource, economic, financial, economic if you have economically, environmental economics, that is, come from not just keeping things out of the landfill, but redirecting those materials back to production cycles where they displace virgin materials and where they use less energy, require fewer chemicals to process, use less water, produce less pollution, almost across the board. So that's the benefit of recycling. It's getting those materials back into production cycles. With food scrap recycling, we need to be talking about soils. AD is great, but if you're not creating usable digestate that can go back into soils and help close that loop of organics and nutrients, you're not really doing the service of giving the highest and best use to food scraps. So we need to be talking about soil when we talk about organics recycling. Okay, so what about some of the metaphors we're trying to come up with to talk about food waste or waste in a different way? Zero waste. Zero waste, there's a lot that I like about zero waste. But the problem of that, again, is it's zero waste, but then what are we doing instead? And if you delve into the strategies, there are some helpful tips in there, but zero waste in and of itself doesn't necessarily grab people in the same way that it should, because it's not telling them what we want to do instead. Sustainable materials management, also promising, but it's still about management of materials, which I think to a lot of people sounds like waste management, which takes the existence of waste as given. So we're managing materials, but what if those materials shouldn't even exist in the first place? What if we come up with some ideas around how to not even have those kinds of materials? Where does that fit in that particular model? What we need to do is get beyond this idea of waste and not waste, the bad away and the good away, to viewing the residuals of our consumption and production as resources. And beyond that, ensuring that they actually are resources, collecting and processing and manufacturing them in ways that render them useful for putting back into other processes. And we can do that with language informed by rethinking our concepts and our strategies and our approaches. So if you're trying to reduce what's discarded in the first place, or separate and appropriately direct discards, it's a lot easier if you're thinking of those materials as separate resources that have unique characteristics and value. On NRDC's food waste team, we typically describe our approach as first, rethinking policies, systems, and concepts that might impede progress in addressing food waste or provide opportunities. And then preventing food from going to waste, rescuing surplus food, because as Lorenzo said in the last session, you do not want to say that you're rescuing food waste. You don't want to imply that you're feeding garbage to poor people. And recycling food scraps, which we're hoping people will understand is a subset of food waste that includes inedible parts along with food that can't be dealt with these other higher strategies for whatever reason. So it's unwieldy. We don't say we want to reduce, rescue, and recycle food waste. It's unwieldy. We describe those things differently at each of those stages because they are different. We want to highlight that at each stage you're actually talking about a different resource with different characteristics and different optimal pathways. So what about the idea of circular economy? I think that also holds some promise. But the problem is, like the traditional recycling symbol, it's sort of this endless loop with no visible inputs or outputs that implies that we can just keep consuming endlessly and that entropy doesn't exist and materials won't degrade and it all just goes back into a happy circle and we don't have to think about the resource depletion that actually occurs. And we know that any strategy we use to manage our discards actually does use resources, although some use fewer resources than others. So really, at some point, if we want to get beyond waste, we have to start talking about consumption and how to think about that sustainably. And I'm not going to get too close into that. I will just note that it's a tough nut to crack, but I'm hoping the smart cookies in this room will use their noodles and come up with the best ideas since sliced bread. So hopefully I've given you some food for thought anyway.
Thank you, Darby. Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Hamilton, professor of economics at Polytech University, who will present Keeping Food Out of Landfills.
Thank you. So my name's Steve Hamilton. I am an economist at Cal Poly University in San Luis Obispo. I want to talk a little bit about a perspective from an economic perspective. I'm an environmental economist. I've spent my career working on environmental policy. I like the keywords from the last talk of words. I think that is very important. The keywords here is really going to be targeting and incentives. And so what environmental economist is all about is finding the externalities, the unpriced goods in an economy, the waste being one example, and finding ways to target prices, attach prices to those things, to incentivize people to not do something because it's costly, or to reward people for doing other things because they can make money doing that. And so I want to talk a little bit from that perspective. So if we think just broadly about what kind of policies will help keep food out of landfills, 2 chickens in every backyard. That'll do it. One issue is that when we think about it, I love the analogy. When we think about food waste, what's waste for one species is food for another. And so there is definitely a role for policies like this. There's also an important difference when you think about food waste and where it occurs. If the food waste occurs at a farm, because prices drop and all of a sudden it's not economic to move crops and those are tilled back in the soil, that's a different kind of problem than if a household dumps a half-eaten sandwich in the garbage, right? Very different implications. And so we have a targeting problem. How do we want to target that problem? Is there a uniform way to target it? Probably not. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But certainly we could go a direction like that. That would certainly help keep the food out of landfills. Classic statistics. You guys have seen this, I'm sure, more than once already. This is the basic scope of the problem. And when you think about it, all of these are really not necessarily problems that are targeted to food waste. So to pick out an example, you think about all the barrels of oil that go into food production, take the loss component and say, look at all the barrels of oil we don't need to use because it's going wasted in our food. True, but the oil and food production problem isn't a food waste problem. You should see the amount of oil that we use to produce the food we eat, right? Why do we just single out the component of the uneaten component and talk about the oil that goes into that? We have a problem with fossil fuel use. The appropriate way to target that would be policies on fossil fuel, a carbon tax, things like that. And so when you think about economics, you really have to think about targeting. Water supplies, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but certainly there's a problem in California agriculture in terms of water rights. The prices that are paid for water, the way water rights are allocated, that's a problem. Not necessarily related to food waste, although food does consume a significant portion of water. So it's helpful to first, before going any farther, to think about where food waste comes from. And you can see that a lot of it comes from farms, from restaurants, retailers, consumer-facing businesses, and then, of course, homes. So I want to talk a little bit in more detail about the food waste coming out of homes. I think that's the most important thing. It's the stuff that really is going to landfills typically. also from restaurants and retailers, but the incentives for food waste and then the targeted policy that you would need to control it is very different, actually. At the farm and retail level, we have different types of policies. So, for example, I talked yesterday a little bit about this idea of a sharing economy, peer-to-peer exchange. And I think that's kind of really emerged in this market, this ability to go on your cell phone and find food. I mean, you could find anything on your cell phone, including food. And so there's a bunch of companies now that are kind of stepping into that space that can make those linkages. Now, that's a problem that requires some scale. It's not a half-eaten basket of strawberries. This is like a pallet of food that's turned down by a processing plant. Things that are the ugly produce, the misshapen stuff that just doesn't make grade, but in volume, like palletized volume that can go to a restaurant or a processor or even a consumer divided across households. But it's a scalable problem. It's not going to really work necessarily as well for post-consumer waste. So we need to think about it. All right, so gorilla in the room is post-consumer household waste. So how do we reduce household waste? And I've done a couple studies now on this, and it's helpful to think about from a targeting perspective. If you want to go after a household food waste problem, the best way to do that is tax the household food waste. Now, this is not practical, but that's the place to start. Conceptually, it's what we'd like to attain, is actually to put a price on that. Like, this is going to cost you money now if you throw that food into conventional waste instead of a compost bin. Two problems. One, we lack measurement tools. Our waste is all kind of mixed together in these bins and picked up at the curbside, and just kind of this kind of away idea. It just goes out of the household into the bin and it's gone, right? So that's an important concept. We don't really measure it very well. There's also an enforcement problem. I know many of you are aware in the city of Seattle had a policy where they were fining consumers for putting food scraps into a traditional waste instead of a compost bin. And this was challenged actually by Washington Supreme Court on privacy grounds. Like, they didn't want the garbage people snooping through their trash can. This is my private can. That's something that needs to be surmounted. I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But so for now, I want to talk first about, if we think about household food waste, and we can't tax the waste coming out the house. And by the way, even if you could tax it in the can, people could put it down their garbage disposal and evade the tax. So that's a problem, right? You can't really observe what goes on in a household. If they evade the tax, then you can't charge it. But let's talk for a moment about, if we can't have a policy like that, what can we do? And now I think you run into targeting problems, and I think this is very serious, because food waste is a hard thing to target. And so the two obvious things are, if you think about where does food waste come from, it comes from the product of two things: the amount of food that people buy, and then the amount of it that they utilize. And so you can go after food purchases. That's your demand curve, right? If you raise the price of food, people will buy less food. We could do that. We could also improve food utilization. There's a lot of efforts on that, born on datings, to provide better information to consumers, to have better labeling, to allow consumers to lower the cost of utilizing food. So those are the two kind of levers you could think about adjusting. But these are really second best. It's not the targeting you want, and it runs into problems. And so, for example, I have a paper with Tim Richards at Arizona State this year that shows really the problems that you can have with this type of policy. The most obvious example, if you think about the technologies in our generation that have most greatly improved, lowered the cost of food utilization, made it easier to utilize food, it's the refrigerator, right? But if you look at the data, since 1970, food waste has gone up by 50%. I mean, it's not clear that refrigeration is going to help the food waste problem. What it does is it incentivizes manufacturers, right? If you have a bigger refrigerator, well, then your retailer says what you really need is a 5-pound carton of strawberries, not a 1-pound carton, right? And so you stock your refrigerator with all this stuff, and it may end up going wasted. It's not clear at all that the refrigerator has caused food waste to go down. Probably just the opposite. And so going after food utilization has this kind of problem, is that you can change the purchases. When the more easy it is to utilize food, consumers may end up purchasing more of it. And the food waste is the product of those two things. So that's a problem. What we find in this study is it really depends on households. Different households respond differently. You got low-income households, you got high-income households, you've got different demographics, and that really matters. So the household demand is really going to determine how well those policies work. And so there's no answer. But clearly, when you aggregate across a large population, these policies are unlikely to be as effective as you'd as you want them to be. All right, so what is the big picture? Well, keeping food out of landfills is really important, as we talked about. But so is keeping plastic out of landfills. When you think about targeting, really we've got a lot of waste stream from the household level into the landfill. And that entire waste stream needs to be encompassed by policy. So when you think about targeting, you can't target the food waste without also thinking about other parts of the waste stream. Really what you need to have from an economic perspective is relative prices. There's 3 cans on the street, and we put it in different cans, there's different prices attached, right? So you can actually incentivize different waste streams that you prefer versus ones you don't. So incentives to keep waste out of landfills. Probably the big picture, in my experience, what I think is needed to really address the household problem is moving more towards this tax on waste. We need to be able to measure waste volumetrically on the curbside. I think there's been a lot in the technology conference that we had yesterday. There's people with scale technology and camera technology to measure and try to account for waste. That's what's needed. In fact, if you look, I do quite a lot of work in water economics. And if you look in California, a very water scarce environment, the hub for the California water system is through Sacramento Delta area. There's not a water shortage there, but it's connected to everywhere else in California. And so that's kind of like where the water shortage starts. A couple areas there that don't have volumetric charges. Just the water bill is a fixed monthly rate, $50 a month, let's say. No volumetric. If you use more, you don't have to pay more. It's just a fixed fee per month. What happens? In these areas, despite California's water problems, the middle of a drought, in the summer, during a drought year, in these regions that have fixed fees and not volumetric, people put sprinklers on their roof and use that for air conditioning. It's not an efficient system. You really need to go to volumetric charges, price per pound on waste. So we need a lot of metering technology. That's probably the next step to solving that problem, would be to install things like cameras to have scale so we can actually charge people differentially, even with the same size can. I know my neighbors often have their stuff to the brim and ours is not, right? So why are we paying the same rate for that? We have a very different response to waste. When you price it and it's costly, you're gonna consume differently in your household. You might be more careful about throwing things away. You might buy less from Amazon if it comes full of plastic packaging. You might do less of that if you're charged on volume. But the other thing too is this allows, the other part of this solution would be raising consumer prices. One problem that we do have with food, like other waste products, is it's cheap. Packaging is cheap, food is cheap. It creates a waste culture. Differential pricing. So this is the key. If you can go volumetric, then you can adjust the relative prices. Maybe if we want to have composting, have subsidies on the compost bin and price less on the others. And what this all comes back around to is a central policy that's used in economics when we can't observe what consumers are doing in their household. We just they could dump things down a garbage disposal if you like. It's a deposit refund system. What a deposit refund system does is it charges everybody up front a higher price on, say, food items, on packaging items. You're just charged full freight, and then you get subsidies when you put it in the bin. The stuff that comes back into the channel where you want it, even if you can't observe what's going on in the household, it becomes equivalent to it's implicitly a tax on waste. Charge it up front, only rebate it back when it goes in the waste stream that you want. So this is a deposit refund system. I think it's important when you think about waste management. We don't really think of aluminum. That's probably the best deposit refund system in the waste system right now is aluminum cans. I don't even have to have the recycling bin pick it up. People will come on their bikes and pick it up from my house, right? We have a deposit refund system. They get money for it. It goes away. So this kind of a system is nice. It solves the Seattle problem. If you could get a refund for what's in your compost bin and you're getting paid for it, a subsidy against your waste collection bill, the consumer uproar is going to be less on privacy, right? You're going to get compensated for it, so you might not mind if someone's looking through your compost bin. So this is important, the ability to set relative prices. And also in a deposit refund system, when you put a refund back on the supply chain, it also allows the supply chain to develop. Things like composting programs. Those are things we might have to subsidize because it might be really an expensive way to go. If we want to rebuild soils, from a farming perspective, you can buy fertilizer, right? So why are we doing this? Well, we might want to have a subsidy and to artificially change those prices and make more cost effective and capitalize that supply chain. And so that's really important. So that's, again, I think this is where the market has to go to solve the problem.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next speaker is Dr. Jonathan Deutsch, professor at the Center for Food and Hospitality Management and Department of Nutrition Sciences at Drexel University, who will present From Cost to Revenue, the Food System Sensitive Model for Keeping Nutrition Out of the Dumpster.
Thank you, everyone. I think this talk will build nicely on the first two, which was totally unplanned, but I'm glad there's some like-minded thinking. Partly because the work I'm going to talk about really came out of not thinking of food as food and food waste as food waste, but as pounds of stuff that had to be moved. And the solution to moving that stuff around was a tech solution and a sort of financial solution. We're advocating is really to include the culinary voice in these kinds of decisions. Some of you may have heard my story before, the famous banana story. I'm going to tell it again, so if you've heard it before, you can grab some coffee and be back within 15 minutes. But I think it's important to illustrate the importance of the culinary solution, and there's some new information, which is a new video on how far we've come that will hopefully work. It worked yesterday, so I'm optimistic. So I'll tell you how we got involved in the food waste world, and I'll give you a little bit of background. I'm a professor of culinary arts and science, and I teach multiple classes, but my main area is food product development and culinary innovation. So I develop new food products and have done that in industry for many years, not necessarily on the sustainable or health promoting side. I've contributed to my weight and the weight of many others. And at Drexel, we started something called the Drexel Food Lab, which is a good food product development and culinary innovation lab. And the idea there is to take the kinds of techniques that food scientists use to make food wonderful and craveable and addictive and the joy of your day, and say, well, what if we could apply those same techniques and work with food that could be more sustainable, healthier, or more accessible in some ways. And so we were roped into the world of food waste, which has become a major portfolio of our work, by Tom O'Donnell at the EPA, who some of you may know. Tom is one of the people in our region, Region 3, who's responsible for food waste. And our neighborhood in Philadelphia was designated a federal promise zone by the Obama administration. And what that means is it's an area of high potential, which sounds very positive. And drilling down a little bit further, what that means is it's an area of extremes. We have high poverty, so the national food insecurity rate is about 1 in 7. Ours locally is 1 in 4. About 70,000 people in our local neighborhood in West Philadelphia are food insecure. At the same time, we have this great wealth, these very rich anchor institutions. It's actually quite a lot like Vegas if you've driven around, right? We have the University of Pennsylvania, we have Drexel University, we have Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, we have Amtrak, we have Aramark headquarters. All of that is like right there in the neighborhood alongside this extreme poverty. And so the EPA's approach was to say, all right, enough. We estimate, for example, the EPA, that about 280,000 pounds of food, I believe it's per month, I'll have to check, I think per month, is wasted and available to deal with that meal gap and that food insecurity. We estimate that we'll need about 70,000 pounds locally in the neighborhood to fill that gap. That's about 4 times the need, which is pretty consistent with a lot of reports and studies. Let's start locally. There's no excuse to be surrounded by these anchor institutions for any sort of food insecurity. So they started this program without us with some tech students who are really focused on GIS and urban planning from our Ivy League neighbor, University of Pennsylvania. And those tech students really focused on from a mapping GIS approach, how do we get this surplus food to people who need it? And they worked locally with some of these rich institutions. And one of them was a supermarket chain, which has been a great partner on this work, called Brown ShopRite, Brown Superstores. So they own about 13 ShopRites and fresh grocers in the Philly area. And so what the tech students did was they did an audit of the food waste from the supermarket, and they kind of tracked it to see where it would go. Much of it was really handled well. So meat, for example, pulled on the sell-by date, frozen, picked up once a week by Philabundance, which is our food bank, distributed, cold chain kept, wonderful, very little waste from retail to consumer. Other products were much more problematic. Milk, bakery items, the store cakes, the sheet cakes, which the food bank didn't want to pick up for nutritional reasons, and produce. And in particular, leafy greens, berries, and bananas. And the thinking was that these items, by the time you put them on a refrigerated truck, take them to the warehouse, sort them, redistribute, get them out to people who need them, you put bananas on a refrigerated truck and you have brown bananas. So a lot of those items were going to compost, and ShopRite has a pretty progressive organics recycling composting program. So the students, the Ivy League students, came up with a solution for this, and that solution was, before things go into the compost, let the food bank take everything they're going to take. Wonderful, done. Everything else, before it goes into the compost, let's let anyone who has a nonprofit, food bank, soup kitchen, shelter, after-school program, senior program, anyone who needs food, let them come to the store and take what they want. We're covered under the Good Samaritan Act. It's a tax benefit for the organization. Everything's wonderful. So they did. By 9:30 in the morning, which is the slowest time of the supermarket day, all of the overripe, ugly stuff from the produce section is pulled. All of the leftover cakes and bakery items from the bakery are pulled. They all go out in the loading dock from about 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And during that hour, people can come up and take whatever they want. Station wagons, vans, refrigerated trucks, whatever. Good riddance, thank you, and let's feed people. Okay. So we were brought in to kind of look at this program, and initially we were asked to be a donor, and we don't have a lot of surplus food because we're a culinary school, and we serve a bunch of hungry college students who love leftovers. But we were taken on this journey to follow the food. So we followed the food from the supermarket to a shelter nearby, and that shelter is a few blocks away. Really, really skilled chef, a former fine dining chef who just kind of got fed up feeding unappreciative rich people and, wanted to make a difference. And so she took a job at the shelter. It was a shelter for women and children, about 50 beds, and really scratch-cooked, beautiful food whenever possible. So that day she picked up cakes. There's this epidemic of unclaimed birthday cakes at every bakery. I don't understand ordering a birthday cake and then not showing it up to pick it up, but it was happy birthday someone. Birthday cakes, lettuce, tomatoes, bananas, some shelf-stable stuff that was too small in quantity, odds and ends of cans and things that the food bank didn't take. So she brings that back to the kitchen. That was at 10 a.m. And then she starts to prepare the rest of lunch. So she already had chicken and rice on the menu. She used the lettuce and tomatoes, made a beautiful salad. She put out the sheet cake and then took the bananas, took a big stainless steel bowl of bananas, put them at the end of the buffet. Noon, the women and children in the shelter are coming through, beautiful plates, lots of smiles. They're so happy, and despite their tough times, to have a nice lunch. So we watch the food. What percentage of the women and the children in the shelter would you guess grabbed a banana on their way through? Oh, let's do it in the actual N. So there's about 50 residents. How many would you guess grabbed a banana? At the end of the lunch, they clean up, they pack the chicken and rice, and they put it in the fridge so that if anyone's hungry between meals, they can grab it. They toss the salad, they discard the salad because it was already dressed. The sheet cake goes in the kind of staff room for unhealthy snacking. What happens to the bananas? Bananas went right to the dumpster. Couple they saved in case anyone was hungry. The next day, chef goes back to the supermarket, lettuce, tomatoes, cake, more bananas, right? So the supermarket has a great composting program. The shelter does not. They landfill. The supermarket has money to, take care of their compost. The shelter does not. So great, again, to Darby's talk, great ideas, great technology, but just not forgetting that this is food and we can kind of manipulate this. So our culinary students said, there's easier solutions for this. We can make something with those bananas and get people to eat them rather than discarding them, right? So what was the product? Banana cake, banana bread? Absolutely not. Terrible, terrible idea. So why is that a terrible idea? One is, if you were listening carefully, you know there was already cake, right? So you're having a second cake with, no one should eat, nutritionists would say cakes are sometimes food, right? So we don't want to promote their consumption every day. So that's part of it for sure. It takes a lot of other ingredients, I heard someone say, right? Flour, sugar, eggs. My banana bread is always made with dark chocolate and dark rum. Those are expensive ingredients, right? And key. Yeah, for sure. And the other thing is, who's made a banana bread in recent memory? Anyone? How many bananas per loaf went into that? 2? How many bananas in a case? You may not know this. This is about 50. So you have 50 women, 20 and children, 25 loaves of banana bread on top of the cake they already have, right? Not a good solution. Banana chips, oven space, labor, right? So smoothies are close. So they made something and someone said freezing. Simplest recipe in the world. It's one ingredient, although you can add more, right? It's banana ice cream. You take bananas, you freeze them, and you mash them. You can use a machine. You don't have to use a machine. You can add milk, one of the other things. So CACFP, the USDA's Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, specifies that for shelters, every shelter resident has to have 1 cup of milk per meal and snack per day, per person, sorry. So that's 40 ounces, meals and snacks. That's over a quart of milk. So I have about 2 tablespoons a day in coffee. They have freezers full of those little school milk cartons just waiting for trash day. That's the whole, and they get it for free. They have to accept it in order to get their funding. So you could add milk, you can add sweetener, but you don't have to. What do you think the uptake was in banana ice cream? Out of those 50 women and children, how many do you think had banana ice cream? Almost all. It was pretty much 100%. Maybe 1 or 2 said no, but I think I remember everyone having it. More important than the food waste reduction, which is controversial to say in this room, was the sort of cultural change, right? You take someone who's having a really hard time in their life and you say, have a fruit. Okay. You say, do you want ice cream? Has anyone ever said no to that question, right? So it just kind of really transformed not only the mechanics of the problem, but the cultural and social aspects, which I think is important to remember too. We're not just moving truckloads, right? Food is emotional, food is memory, food is so much more. So this got us thinking. We dug a little deeper, and I'm not going to bore you with some of the research, but it's all published, and I can share the links. That there's a lot of food like that that's perfectly good, that may even be being donated, but it may not be being eaten. And so we developed something called the food system sensitive model, which is basically taking what was being done by the GIS folks and saying, remember this is food, and let's look at each ingredient and what could be done with it, and let's look at the environment too. Yes, banana chips are a great idea if you are a dehydrator. It's really a terrible idea if you have one oven that has to feed 50 people and it's going to tie up your oven for 6 hours waiting for bananas to dry, right? So it has to be sensitive to that. And this, again, is published, and I can share this with you. So this got us moving upstream, and I want to share something that just came out. So banana ice cream is adorable, lovely. It's a nice idea, but is it scalable? Will it move the needle? So we moved upstream and started looking at where there was waste at the retail level, at the wholesale level for other folks. I'm going to see if I can play this video.
Food waste is a serious problem. Some estimate as much as 40% of food in the US ends up in the trash. That's everything from you tossing out milk that's gone bad to commercial food producers trucking out tons of scraps. That second piece is really where there's a big opportunity for change. And the Food Lab at Drexel University is helping make it happen.
Ours is a very practical challenge. It's what do we do with all this, right?
Food producers come to the Drexel Food Lab with a food waste problem, and students will develop commercially viable products, what they call upcycled food.
The project we're doing right now is for Bimbo Bakeries USA, which is the largest bakery in the country. They have about $635 million of bread and other baked goods that are returned to the factory because they've reached their sell-by date.
We get returns from our different customer teams, whether it be grocery stores, convenience stores, or otherwise. And we wanted to find a means for reuse for our products.
The very first thing we do, we observe people in their natural habitat, figure out how they're interacting with bread, how they're using bread. The next thing we do is some consumer insights. We bring consumers into the classroom and do a focus group. Those develop into themes around which we generate new ideas. We prototype, we recheck them with consumers, and by the end of this really rapid 10 weeks, we will have solutions for the company to consider.
It's important for Bimbo Bakeries USA to have a dialogue and to help solve the food waste problem. We're a big company. We have an opportunity to provide a great amount of impact.
Waste is a social construct, so what you do with food determines whether it's food or waste, right? We want to reframe waste to think of it as not recycling food waste, but preventing food waste. We have a long history at Drexel of providing a lot of those ideas to our students.
I'm working on an avocado pit tea. Turns out avocado pits are really high in antioxidants. And I was like, whoa, we're just throwing these away? Like, we can create something out of this. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine. We're just not used to using it. That doesn't mean that we can't do other things with them.
The World Bank estimates that by 2050, we're going to have to increase food production by 50% to keep up with the growing population. If you're a farmer, if you're a baker, or whatever you're doing, no one can scale 50%. But then if you factor in that 33 to 40% that we're wasting and chip away at that 50% that we need, then you start to see, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. We're getting a lot of requests from food producers who want to green their habits or make healthier food, but they need help doing that. They need ideas, they need energy, they need talent, and we can work with them to provide that.
So I'm going to stop there. Next steps for us are we have the generous support of the Clineal Foundation to help upcyclers with technical assistance. We worked with the James Beard Foundation on a curriculum to get culinary students and culinary instructors aware of these issues, and of course, are continuing our work. So thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all of our speakers again.